Welcome to Artist Talk, the Monmouth Museum's podcast series. With 2 galleries and 2 children's wings, the Monmouth Museum offers unique programming for artists and the community. I'm Erika Schaefer, the Executive Director, and today I'm joined by Kyle Lang. Kyle's a darkroom artist from New Jersey. After leaving his job as a Nikon representative at 20, he moved from the US to New Zealand in search of a fresh backdrop for inspiration. The trip triggered a series of travels over the next 5 years across the globe, and his career as a photographer developed. His landscape photographs have been included in numerous publications, exhibited locally and internationally, and have received multiple awards. Simultaneously, he spent time experimenting in the darkroom, earning him an artist grant from the Princeton Area Community Foundation, and he became a resident artist at the TYPA Center for Printing and Paper Arts. Kyle, thanks for joining me today, and we are thrilled to have your work here at the Monmouth Museum.
I'm really happy to be here. This is my first big local show, so it's a pretty big deal for me.
I love it.
And it was really interesting to kind of curate such a bigger space, because I feel like I work in smaller batches at a time. And when I started to okay, I've got this large space, let me put all of my smaller bodies of work together, it was kind of interesting how they communicated with each other and worked together. And that was very interesting, fresh for me.
Yeah, a new palette almost, a new canvas,
really,
right?
Yeah, so I looked at my own work in a different way.
I love it. So tell me about your journey as an artist. What led you to this moment here?
Well, I started taking photographs when I was 14, 15. I started with a little Kodak point and shoot. And just the more that I photographed, the more interested I became in it. And eventually I got a DSLR as a Christmas gift. And my first interest in photography was about close-ups of insects and frogs and flowers and stuff. As a kid, I was really into the outdoors and loved insects and bugs and researched whatever I could. And I had an insect collection, so when I started photography, instead of collecting insects, I would collect photographs of insects and research them. And then just the more that I dove into it, I started getting now into portraits and then landscapes and kind of exploring a lot of photographing. And then I got a job as a Nikon representative, which was all about the technical side of gear and learning coatings on lenses and the processors and the cameras and image sensors and everything. And at a certain point it got more about the gear than it was about the art. So then that's when I got into film photography. It was you pick up a camera, it's got 2 settings on it, no other crazy bells and whistles, and it's just me, the camera, and what I'm shooting. And at that time, I quit the job and started to travel, and dove into film photography and landscape work, and yeah.
And how was your family through all of this? So did they support your journey as an artist? I know for me it was a little bit of a struggle, I had to kind of, convince people and do a little bit more of, the life they expected me to. And now I feel like I can finally say I'm an artist after all this time. So how was it for you?
My parents were definitely supportive. I feel like they had maybe a difficult time understanding how I would make it work, kind of, but they were we're happy for you that you want to do this, and they were definitely supportive. And when I first came to them and I was hey, I want to move out, and they're oh, where are you thinking? There's some cool towns around here. I was well, I got my visa and I'm going to New Zealand. And
oh boy.
We were out at dinner and they were just no words even, just sat back and was looked at each other. And
yeah, you want to be supportive, but how supportive do you really want to be?
And they're whoa,
Okay.
But I really wanted just kind of new scenery. I really wanted to be in a new environment, and I loved nature and landscapes, and to go and travel and do like hikes and
Fully immersed.
just
in
also
it.
be on my own. Like I wanted to just like jump away and like just kind of ignore everything and be on my own and see how it went, like my friends were always teasing me like, yeah, you're going to be there for like 2 weeks and fly home once you're broke. And I ended up staying there for a full year and like continued traveling and stuff after that as
Yeah,
well.
I looked at your website, and I mean, your travels, the photos that you have are amazing, and you've been to some really amazing
Thank you.
places too. So, all right, so you start off on your journey to New Zealand, and then how did it turn into kind of this global travel? Because it's amazing. I mean, it's beautiful.
It was just like, I don't know, some people would say like I called it travel bug. It's kind of like an addiction type thing, where I started to travel, met some really cool people like right away, and we just kind of rented a car together, drove around, took photos, and then, I would stop to work. Like I worked on a vineyard at some point, Oyster Bay is the vineyard, Sauvignon Blanc, and then there was this big earthquake in Marlborough, New Zealand, which is where I was working, and a lot of the vineyards were destroyed, so I was out of work, and then I traveled a little bit more. It's like, okay, it's time to go. And then money or like funds depleted a little bit again. Started
happens.
working at a bar, and like at that same time I was bartending, but I also was printing some of my work at the same time and set up like a little like stall on the street basically, and was like selling my photos. And so this was in Queenstown. It was like a more touristic town, so it was a good spot to sell my work. And after my visa was expired, I was like, I still have some money. There's places nearby, so I flew to Indonesia and stayed there for a little over a month, and then from Indonesia went to Thailand, and then Thailand to Nicaragua, and then it just kind of like continued this way. And
So there was no plan from the beginning. You just rolled with
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Went with
it was
life.
literally just like, I'm just gonna go, and
Yes.
like I don't see a downside to it. Like even if I run out of money, I just come back and I'm in the same place I was before. So just went for it, and
That's
it was
awesome.
a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I think that after a certain time, though, of doing this, I started to feel like I kind of want to work on something or like work towards something after a certain point. Like it's a lot of fun. Really glad I had the experience, but now like I want some type of purpose, kind of. And I started to dive more into like research of photography and printmaking and like working more with what I was already doing and kind of growing on it. And that's when I started to look for like funding and grants and residencies and just learning in general and diving into it. And again, it's kind of like that same like physical journey of just like I'm gonna jump into this research and like see where I go, kind of deal, and I just explored different techniques, different processes, and like one thing led to another, and I'm still doing it now and still exploring and learning new things.
Yeah, I mean, I can almost imagine the first time you in a dark room, right?
Yeah.
It's because it is an exciting, and I don't know how much it's done really anymore in schools necessarily. I know for me, when I was in high school, that was a transformative moment to just have that experience. It's so tangible.
Yeah, for sure.
So your process is kind of varied. I guess you find different ways as you go. When I look at your artwork, some is more traditional photography, but then
Yeah.
others I can see that you've definitely put your own spin on the process. So what's it like? I mean, I guess pick one of your styles and maybe walk me through the process of it.
Well, I think these like silver gelatin prints are probably the best place to start. They're pretty straightforward. I started darkroom printing in high school. I'm sure
Yep.
you have as well. And like something about the tangibility of it, and like growing up with digital cameras, like to see an image like come to life kind of in your hand is something about it was amazing to me. Like literally like magic or alchemy or something. It was cool. And so that was kind of like my introduction to printmaking was silver gelatin. And so playing around with like the images that I would shoot, enlarging them, and I think after a certain point, I kind of got used to the process and like had a really good understanding of it, and was like, okay, how can I like mess with this or play with this a little bit more so that I can, bend the rules a little bit and try new things. And then that's when I started the Manifest Content series, which was kind of like photo manipulations of like overlaying multiple negatives and images together to kind of create an entirely new image that you wouldn't just take a picture of this tree with roots growing out of it, and I started to think of ways to like, what can you do in Photoshop I can do in the darkroom and like make with my hands kind of. And it was honestly more of a means of just exploring the medium and expanding on traditional, like straightforward darkroom printing. And that really interested me, and I kind of continued to dive more into it, and that kind of led me to getting the grant from the Princeton Community Foundation. And so for that proposal, I proposed like, hey, I want to go and travel the United States and collect negatives to work on like a new darkroom project. I'm not sure what it's going to be, but like I'll figure something out kind of. And when I remember getting the email and it was like, congratulations, I was like, no, I was like screaming. I was like, hey, wait, friend, I was with my friend at the time. I was like, no way, you can't believe it. And so then that summer, I did a road trip, just grabbed a bunch of film cameras, traveled and collected negatives and stuff. And then, when I got back, was like, okay, I'm going to develop everything. And then went into the darkroom, and that was kind of where the figuring out was. Like the shooting process was travel, experience, have fun, like collect negatives, and then bring it all back. And now it's time to kind of create something with it. And that led me to the Protected Land series. Because I had a lot of pictures of the national parks. That's just where I naturally wanted to go on the road trip. And so with this project, I kind of used a similar process with the Manifest Content, where you kind of make a mask to overlay the negatives, but with photo montage, you're kind of blending the images together, so you're not sure like where one ends and the next one begins, and it kind of looks very natural. And there were certain times when I had difficulty blending the images together and hiding the mask. So instead I was like, what if I put more emphasis on the mask and made like that mask and the lines kind of part of the image, like a main part of the image, rather than try to hide it. And just like one idea led to the next, and I started to put like pictures of the national parks into these geometric shapes. And it just made sense, the first couple that I did. I was like, I don't know exactly why, but it just seems to make sense to me, and started to make more and more. And, I really liked how they turned out, and it was like well received. I would share it with other people, and, everyone seemed to understand it without explanation,
Yeah. Where do you find your inspiration? Are there particular artists that really kind of speak to you, or even during your time in school that you kind of like would look at and find some pieces of your creative style start to emerge? Or
well, Ansel Adams was,
Of course.
yeah, in high school, getting into darkroom photography, Ansel Adams was like the big name, and his approach to photography was really interesting. He also had like a deep connection with nature, and like he's kind of a big reason why the national parks are, exist today, and his work like of helping preserve the lands, and the way that he approached photography in like a more methodical sense. Like he developed a lot of processes in the darkroom himself. He put a lot of systems in place to help you get like the proper exposure and lighting, reading light. And I liked that side, the technical, the way that his mind worked and the way that he approached photography was really interesting. but I also feel like it's lacking some more creative or like emotional aspect. I, of course, started with straight photography, but I think over time I wanted to kind of bend things a little bit more and create something a little more abstract and a little less controlled. And, you know, the geometric shapes are extremely controlled. You know, they're very like, everything is measured and cut to size and, you know, exposed very properly. And I think it was at that point that I was like, okay, it's time to kind of leave this behind and like start to let go, control a little bit of what I was doing, if that makes sense. So I guess one of the processes that came after that point was mordensage, which is basically where you take a silver gelatin print and you stick it in a bath of very strong acid, and it's a mixture of glacial acetic acid, copper chloride, and hydrogen peroxide. And basically the parts of the print that are dense with silver start to bubble up and remove themselves. They kind of burst in these little bubbles, but the emulsion stays on the print and creates these veils. But that practice of, you know, I have this finished print, let me just like drop it in acid and let go and just, you know, accept whatever happens. And that was like a kind of learning experience for me too, because I was always very much, okay, I need to get the contrast perfect and like printing has to be right and
You
like
lose that
control
control.
every single step. And then this was like a great practice of just be comfortable with what happens. And like, you know, I love the works that came out of it.
I saw online too, you're going to have some workshops that you do, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's great.
I think with the workshops, I'm going to start with something a little simpler,
Yeah.
a little less toxic. But
Step one, right?
Yeah. But I definitely, you know, I think that I want to start showing other people what I'm doing, because I think that, you know, the thing that initially attracted me was that, you know, the alchemy, the tangibility of photography. And I think that there's so much magic in the process that like when you sit and like look at the finished piece, you're not watching, you know, the print drop in acid and bubble up and bleach and like disappear and then come back again. Like there's this whole, you know, magic that happens behind the scenes. And I think I'm doing workshops and like making videos and stuff and want to share like that aspect of it as well.
Yeah. I understand that as an artist. And I paint, but I lose myself when I'm painting. And, you know, and I return, I take that step back, and it's that same kind of magic in a way where you're just kind of looking at the whole piece together. And it's an amazing process that you have. I love it. And I think we should definitely do some workshops and stuff here.
That would
I have
be
a
cool.
whole idea now for high school kids or for like a winter break kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we're definitely going to connect on that piece of it. So when you are creating, you must have a go-to playlist, or what inspires you? What kind of music are you listening to?
I made a darkroom playlist.
Of course you did. What's on this playlist?
It ranges really a lot, and some of it is kind of like classical music if I want to feel very fancy working.
And what's the
on
crazy
my
stuff?
Technical prints. And then there's some like more like funky, groovy kind of music where, you know, I'm in the dark room, no one's around, I'm like dancing and like, you know, making a print and just like enjoying the time. You know, I've got a lot of time in this room.
Yeah.
Let's have like a dance party kind of the deal. You know, some is more like just instrumental kind of music, no words and stuff. It really
You have to
changes,
share with us
but
your playlist, or one of your playlists.
Yeah, I can.
You gotta see what I create next to that. So how long have you lived in New Jersey? You grew up here?
I grew up in Hamilton.
Okay.
And I live now in Bordentown and opened a studio in Burlington. So I'm from New Jersey,
Yeah. The Emerging Artist series that we have here at the museum is, I'm so glad that you were able to apply and that you were accepted. I think you were a great addition for 2022.
Thank you.
how do you think being part of something like Emerging Artists, how does that help you at this stage of your career? What could it help to provide you with, and why might somebody else want to apply?
I honestly think that, like I mentioned earlier on, that I started to look at my work in a different way. I was very much in the habit of just creating something, cool, put it aside, put it in a box or like in a portfolio and hide it away. But once you guys, sent me the email and was like, hey, we'd love to have you, I was like, okay, like I have to like really now look at what I'm doing and start to think about framing and presentation and like, what works do I put together and how do they communicate with each other? And that was so important for me to like really look at my work in that way, because I would work in kind of like smaller sets at a time and just, focus on more of the creation, and that I just kind of throw my artwork aside and like, store it away. But I was so involved in the process that, through the Monmouth Museum and the New Jersey Emerging Artists, I was able to kind of look at what I created in a new way and kind of show it,
Yeah.
And that's so important, It's kind of like grounding everything that I made in a way.
Yeah, it's a chance to look. I know oftentimes you kind of put it aside, either sell it, store it real fast, and on to the next.
Yeah.
So it kind of forces you to take a look at everything, at the collective view of it.
Yeah,
I noticed online that you have a really great social media following on Instagram. So one thing that a lot of artists struggle with is doing that, is getting that kind of following in place and being strong, interacting with them. What tips do you have for other artists? Because it's clearly a strength you have. So I want to know. I want to know for the museum. I want to know for myself. And then for other artists that we're trying to help along the way. How'd you do it?
I just kept up with it for a long time. Just shared whatever I was doing, posting work. Also connecting with people, though, is important. Is like, you can't just post something and then leave. I think it's important, like, to see social media as a way of connecting with other artists, in a more personal way, rather than going to their website and like sending a formal email. It's like I found some really amazing artists that I admire and have connected with from, around the world that I would have never met otherwise. And I think that is more important than like the quantity of followers. But, at the moment, social media, especially Instagram, is kind of pushing like videos now. And at first I was a little hesitant because I was like, well, I'm, a visual, like, still image artist, But then it kind of ties into what I was saying before of like working with the process, and kind of sharing that process is really a magical thing that many people don't see. And so, not many people see what goes on behind, each image. And when they see that, I think, like a light bulb goes in their head, or like, something clicks, and it seems to make more sense to people. And I think that when people, I'm sharing now more videos through social media, and that's where a lot of my followers seem to have come from.
It is fun to watch. The images kind of just appear, and, to see the behind-the-scenes process of it.
Yeah, and it's something that I personally love, and so kind of makes sense that if, someone else can enjoy this without having an enlarger and a darkroom and the chemicals to do it themselves, But another thing, there was, coming back to the social media, like growth, was just keeping up with posting what I was doing. But there was like one point when the official like Kodak Instagram page shared one of my images that was shot on Kodak film. And so I went from like 800 followers to like 11,000.
That's amazing.
And like in 30 minutes,
Yeah.
I didn't know what happened. I remember I was like, it was in the winter and I was out shooting with my friend, And I just like checked my phone and it was just filled. And I was like scrolling and scrolling and scrolling through the notifications, like, what happened? And then I get to the very bottom and it was like, Kodak tagged you in a post. I was like, all right,
Yeah,
cool.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's a moment.
And that kind of just like snowballed, and like, there was just a single image that was just being kind of shared over and over again, and it kind of like grew for, I would say, like a month or two. It was getting a lot of recognition, and then that kind of like died down. But I noticed that happens over time. Like, it happens over and over again, rather. Like, if you keep up with it, one thing, will catch the attention of somebody who has more followers. They share it, and then it just kind of like snowballs from there. But, you can't rely on this one post to like carry you for the rest of your career.
Yeah.
It's like a very temporary thing, and you kind of like, you grow a little bit from it and it dips down, and then you just keep up with it again and keep going with it.
So what's next for you? Are you working on a new series or planning a new big adventure? What are you manifesting next?
I think I'm going to hold off on traveling at the moment.
Okay.
I just opened a studio, and so this is kind of like my next big adventure. I'm diving more into printmaking, working with more like ink on paper, still using photography through like a photogravure process. So kind of etching into a plate, pressing ink into the plate, putting it through a press.
That's a lot of fun.
It is. I'm really excited. I tried it at the TYPA residency, and I just loved it. It was like a very like literal, tangible, like pressing ink into the plate with your hands, and it's just
Kind of like a zinc etching, right? Or is it a little different?
It's similar to zinc etching,
Okay.
but imagine like instead of hand etch, it's a photograph that's kind of eaten away with
Very
chemicals. But yeah, it's that same process of pushing ink into the plate and then kind of like wiping the plate clean. And this process reminds me of a quote actually from Ansel Adams. He said something along the lines of, the negative is comparable to the composer's score, and the print is comparable to its performance. So like, each print that you make is going to vary in subtle ways, but it all comes back to the plate that you would make, and I love that.
I love that. Yes.
It makes me look at it in a very different way, and have, much greater appreciation for it. But also, project-wise, I'm also working on the Life Fruit series, which I started in the summer of this year. And I'm still figuring it out, kind of. I think I started this project, and I started this project in hopes of like sharing more of it here, but I think it wasn't ready yet to like share at a larger scale. So basically, I'm taking photographic chemicals, and so I make an emulsion, coat it onto a plate of glass, and then I paint with photographic chemicals onto the emulsion, and then I expose this to light. And again, it's kind of that practice of just letting go and like have some control and then just see what happens. And so now I have like a bunch of these glass plates, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to display them. And so I'm still making more of them, but I have this idea of like a backlit frame where they're kind of like hung on the wall, but light can pass through them because they're on glass. So I'm starting to like work on the best way to present them, kind of. I think I need to like literally just make my own frame for them from scratch. So
That's very cool.
thanks.
I love it.
Thank you.
I can't wait to see what else you create. If anyone wants to find you online, what's your website, Instagram?
Instagram is lang, L-A-N-G, .120. 120 is the size of the film that I shoot.
Ah, okay. Now I know.
And my website is lang120.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining me today. It was really great to learn so much about you and your process, and I can't wait to see what else you create and see it at the Monmouth Museum too. So hopefully we'll have pieces of your work in the future here. And for more information on visiting the museum, visit monmouthmuseum.org, or you can find us on Instagram at the Monmouth Museum. Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks so much.
Yay!